a very warm welcome to you all from Wits Sport and Health, WiSH, this WiSH Wednesday seminar, which we think will be not only informative, but a lot of fun. Thanks again for all of you that have supported our webinars, which are now rolling out through 2021. A big thank you, of course, to our sponsor, with whom we wouldn't be able to present these webinars, Ascena Lita, pharmaceutical company, manufacturers of Zepho. And a big thank you to Dr. Robin Saggers in the background, who's operating everything from a technical point of view and whose work we really appreciate. So thank you, all of you. We're going to ask you to interact with us this evening, use the question and answer facility on Zoom, send through your questions to our esteemed guest and panel, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions about running and how to start out running and what it means to be a novice runner embarking on this journey of endurance running. And to help us with this, we've got two panelists who are far more in the know than I am. The first is Belinda Waghorn, who chairs the WiSH Running Interest Group and does a superb job of organizing that. And the second is Coach Parry, Lindsey Parry, Comrades Marathon coach, who's really very well versed in training novices and elite athletes alike. And then, of course, our guest of honor this evening needs, as they say, no introduction and has been on our webinars before. Bruce Fordyce, 9 times Comrades winner, who's going to talk to us a little bit today about what it means to be a Comrades runner, what it means to be a novice Comrades runner, and what it meant to him to be a novice Comrades runner. And that has been the subject of this book called Winged Messenger. And I think Bruce can elaborate as to why he called it the Winged Messenger. Those of you that are seasoned Comrades runners, it'll probably make sense to you. But we really want to share a little bit about the information in the book, but also what went into writing the book. And we really ask you to go out and buy the book. It's got a lot of very, very good anecdotes in it and a lot of information that will ring true to those of you that have walked this journey, and to those of you that want the best information from a champion, but a champion who was also a novice at some stage, running around the rugby field at Wits University. So we look forward to hearing those stories. Bruce, Belinda and Lindsey, thanks very much for holding the reins this evening and sharing your expertise with us. We look forward to an informative and interactive session. Everybody get those questions out there on the Q&A, and I'm going to hand over to Belinda to take it from here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much, John. And again, welcome to everybody who has joined us tonight on this webinar with Lindsey Parry and Bruce. First thing I'd like to just say before we start is the choice of dates for the specific webinar, which obviously I would have preferred to run a bit later, but today is the 24th of March, and obviously Comrades runners everywhere would probably know that in 2 months' time, 24th of May, would have been the 100th running of the Comrades Marathon. And, obviously the anniversary of Comrades was 4 years later of running, because for 4 years, obviously Comrades Marathon didn't happen because of the war. And this is only the second time that the Comrades has been cancelled 2 years in a row due to COVID. So I find this webinar perfectly timed. Although we don't have novices for Comrades this year, I think any novices considering Comrades 2022, this is a perfect time to gain all the information you can from Bruce and set out your own kind of quest to run Comrades 2022. Bruce, your book, Winged Messenger, I have read it. Excellent book, which I already said to you.
Thank you, Belinda.
So my first question to you is, my first thing that came to mind when I read the book, I mean, you ran your first Comrades in 1977. Why write the book now?
Belinda, for me, probably one of the few positive things about this dreadful last year of lockdown was that I suddenly found I had the time, and I had written just very broad guides to two of my best comrades, and it occurred to me that the vast majority of Comrades runners can't relate to somebody who wins or is a gold medalist. I mean, the kind of training that you do there is really, really ridiculous. So I thought I would just try and write something that would appeal to a novice about a bloke who was an ordinary runner. Obviously, you might, about my first Comrades, I ran a silver medal. So I had chosen my parents correctly. So I was genetically gifted, and I was always going to run quite quickly as a youngster. But it was only in later years that I started to train properly and hard to see what would happen if I really put some effort into this. And so why I enjoyed it was because it's about, as I said, an ordinary bloke who decides to run Comrades, but also has a life apart from running, which was that, like all students, I was trying to pass my degree, partying quite a lot, chasing the fairer sex quite a lot unsuccessfully, and then by the way, I was a runner, and so I thought that would relate, runners would relate to that more. And you can see in the book how I started off very gently, and then obviously as it got closer to Comrades time, I started to train quite seriously, but again, just to finish the race. And so the book itself changed, it metamorphosized as I went along, because originally it was going to be, just going to be my training diaries. And there's something strange, and Lindsey will back me, I'm sure, but one of the important things to do as a runner is from very early on to keep a training log or a diary. And by chance, I don't know why, it must be something to do with my character or whatever, from the very first run, I wrote in a little exercise book, and I wrote my training down. To this day, I still do that. I don't use technology. I write everything down, and I write the races in red, and I write everything else, how I felt, how far I went, who I was with, that information. And I started doing that. So the book originally started off as just a transcript of that. I was just going to put the whole, and also by chance, I happened to start running almost a calendar year before the first Comrades that I ran. So I started in June 1976, and I ran my first Comrades in the end of May 1977. I thought I'd do that. And then as I was writing, and as happens, and particularly when I went on runs, once we were allowed to get out, with lockdown, once we were allowed to run, things started to flash back to me, and stories and events from there. And so the book changed a lot. It's still got that basic structure of what do you do when you're a novice for a year before the race, but it's now suddenly, I started adding stories, personal anecdotes, the politics of the time, and all that sort of thing. So the book changed a lot in the process of writing it. And at the end, I'm quite pleased, because a Canadian magazine wrote exactly that, running magazine wrote, it's a very nice mix of professional advice, personal anecdotes, and the politics of the time. And so that's what we finally wound up with.
Right, thank you. Now, as John alluded to earlier, my second question is, please explain for those that haven't run Comrades, how you came up with the title of the Winged Messenger. Yeah,
I'm going to try and show you the book, but the Winged Messenger is not a pretentious, thing. It's the Comrades logo, the emblem on the badge, the emblem emblazoned on the medal. That is Hermes. And Hermes was the Greek god who was the messenger of the gods. So he was the winged messenger. He could fly, and he's a very appropriate Greek god for the Comrades, because he was the god of the roads. But most importantly, he was the only god who had the power to go from the old world to the new world, from the world of the living to the world of the dead and back. Not even Zeus, the king of the gods, could do that. And so I try to say in the book that you become a winged messenger when you run the Comrades Marathon, because you change from the old you, the old world, to a new you, a new world. And I truly believe that once somebody has run Comrades, certainly it happened to me, I realized that if it mattered to me, nothing would ever stand in my way as far as doing something that I wanted to, as long as it mattered to me. And of course, Comrades mattered to me. And as we all know, when we run, and novices will discover, I don't want to put you off, but with about 30 kilometers to go, you're going to be surrounded by other runners, and you're going to feel very, very alone. And with about 25 to 30 kilometers to go, you're going to find somebody, you meet somebody who you deeply admire and respect, and that person is yourself, because only you can get through. And you will swear never, ever, ever again, with some other words, but this is a webinar, so I won't put those in. And generally, with somewhere between an hour and a week after the race, you'll be planning the next year's race, because it transforms you. So that's why I thought Winged Messenger would be, you know, I could have written how to run your first Comrades Marathon. Very boring. I thought Winged Messenger would at least grab people's attention, but it's not a pretentious title. I've been signing books and saying, particularly to novices, I hope you're going to be a Winged Messenger one day soon. So, yeah.
Great title. Can you please just go through your decision, the day you made your decision to run your first Comrades, and then your biggest influence in that decision?
Well, there were a few reasons, but one was that I had always been quite fit at school, and you know, I was a guest speaker for the Blue Bulls once, and I sat next to one of the greatest scrum halves of all time, Fordyce du Preez, and I had to tell him, I was shocked they didn't know that I played scrum half for my under 15B team at school, and so I always loved sport, and when we had athletics, I would do well in school cross country, and my matric year I won it. And then I got to university and I did nothing. And then I played an all boys rugby match and I nearly died. I remember asking the referee how much longer till the end of the game. And I realized that I had got very, very badly out of shape. But that's probably the least important reason. The other was that the Comrades impacted on us really in a large way in about 76. Just a couple of years before that, the race started to grow in popularity and was no longer just the preserve of a few deranged people, you know, actually white males. It was exclusively that until 1975. And 1976 was the first year we had television. And they didn't show the Comrades live, but they showed a packaged version of the race about 2 weeks later. And I watched that by chance, and it just resonated with me immediately. I never thought for one moment that I would win the race. Alan Robb won in 1976. But I looked at some of the ordinary runners and I thought, well, that bloke can do it. I can definitely do it. And then I was in men's residence at Wits, and I met a fellow resident, Jean Lejeune, who'd run it. And he'd run it the year before. And he showed me his medal. And I just looked at this Winged Messenger medal that he got a silver, looked at this thing glinting at me. And I just thought, I really want one of my own. So that got me finally, no, not finally, almost finally. And this is slightly tongue-in-cheek, but not really. My girlfriend broke up with me, and I had a broken heart and suppressed libido, so I needed something to do. And then I had started running, but a thing that really transformed me was June 16th, which was about 8 days after I started running. And what happened on June the 16th was we Wits students, passionate and very involved in the politics of the country, a bunch of us decided we're going to march in support of the students who were dying and being shot in Soweto. So we set off from the Wits campus, all full of passion and fire and whatever. And we got as far as the Queen Elizabeth Bridge. For those of you who know Wits, that's about 400 meters we made before the police set upon us. And the only word for it is they murdered us. And there's some photographs in my book of what happened there. One of my classmates Christine running with blood pouring down her face because she'd been smacked over the head with a baton. And so after that, I was very depressed and wanting some control over a universe that I felt was no longer in my control. I didn't know, you know, these things were happening and I had no part in it. So I just thought that running would give me that sense of purpose and control, and it did. And so I've always said that first 10 minutes run that I did at night, I did it at night because I didn't want anyone to see me around the Wits rugby fields, was the greatest gift I ever gave to myself in my entire life, because it changed my life and has been part of my life ever since.
Thank you. So back to that very first 10 minutes you ran around the Wits field, the notes you wrote in your book after that first 10 minutes, and I'm not going to quote it all, you wrote, the essential thing is motivation.
Yeah. What
motivated you and what motivates you still today to carry on running?
Okay, so what motivated me then was, without any doubt, from the very first step I took, I was running the 1977 Comrades. Nothing was going to stop me doing that. I've always loved athletics, by the way. And for 5 years of my life, I was at school in England. And when I was at school in England, we were allowed to stay up late and watch the Mexico Olympics. I watched 1968 Mexico Olympics, and those athletes from that particular Olympics are still emblazoned in my heart. Kip Keino was the first great East African. Bob Beamon almost jumping out of the long jump pit. Dick Fosbury astonishing the whole world by turning around and going backwards over the high jump bar. Nobody had ever seen that before. David Hemery breaking the 400-meter hurdles record. And then Mama Volda from Ethiopia winning the marathon. So those things were always close to my heart. And yeah, so I was always motivated. That was going to be my goal. And I'm quite good. I like having a goal, and I like having a long-term goal. And because I was a student, obviously things interfere, parties and stuff like that, but always I was back. What motivates me now is I'm really driven by now being part of Parkrun, which I brought to South Africa. It really, at the moment, because of the lockdown regulations, we can't run. We haven't had a parkrun for a year, but that really, really motivates me because it's bringing exercise and sport to people of all ability. So in the front, they'll of a 5K time run on a Saturday morning, there'll be some very elite runners, but at the back, you've got Tani Labaskachny, who takes over an hour, and she's just as important, and we're making a massive difference there. My own running is that without it, I don't have structure in my day. So tomorrow morning, I will wake up at about 4:30, and I will join my running group at about 5:15, and we run 10Ks, and I pretty much I will run 2 weeks without missing a day. And then if something really important gets in the way, like travel or something, I might miss a day or sickness, but I really haven't had any long break from running since June 1976.
Sure. Now, also in your book, you referred a lot to Monty Python and humming music while running. Do you still, while you're running, hum music? Is there quotes that you say to yourself, like you have a running mantra that you use when the going gets tough, or kind of keeps your mind busy while running?
Music's always been a part of my life. So in fact, if there was one thing about my life I would change, if I could change it, it would be that I'd love to be really good at playing a musical instrument, and I'm not. That's a glaring omission. So if I had a second life, I would correct that. But yeah, so I can associate certain music with certain Comrades marathons. I always had a theme song or a theme bit of music that went with that particular year. And if I play it, I go straight back to that particular Comrades. And during lockdown, when we were forced to stay in our properties, I had to run 54 laps of my garden to get a 5K. So I used to literally sing to myself the entire album. I sang Jethro Tull Benefit, which is one of my favorite albums. I sang that entire thing to myself while I was running around trying to do 54 laps to get 5Ks. And then I think people will say sometimes that I've got a sense of humor, and the Python guys, I never in my life have I love this stuff. I can bore you to tears at a dinner party because I'll quote the entire Monty Python Life of Brian, greatest movie ever made. I can do that. And so, yeah, humor and music. I think if you don't have a sense of humor in running, you're not going to be truly great at it, because sometimes you have to laugh at yourself or laugh at others. Our running at times is absolutely magnificent. At other times, it's very funny and comical. Yeah, so music will always be a part of running for me.
Thanks. There's so many questions that I had prepared to ask. Sadly, though, our time is running out. So I have one question, and with that question, I'm going to hand over to Lindsey Parry. So my question is, knowing everything you know now, knowing what you've learned, and looking back, they always say hindsight is 20/20. What would you go back and change to that very first Comrades you ran, if anything?
I would change very little in that first Comrades that I ran. I think it was very important for me to have a gentle, unpressured introduction to the race, which is what I got. I might, you know, what if you tinker with something, I might have tried to go through halfway a little bit more conservatively so I could have a slightly stronger second half, but no, not really. I love that first Comrades. You know, there's other Comrades marathons later where there's a lot that I would change. But the first one, I tell you what I would do is maybe try and enjoy it more. Because I've got a competitive spirit, even though it was my first, I still flogged myself. You know what I mean? I pushed as hard as I could. I really was humbled because I suddenly realized I was going to have to walk on poly shorts. And then I looked around me and I saw that a lot of other people were walking. So I might have said to myself, and I would say this to a novice, you're probably going to run faster, almost definitely going to run faster in future when you come back. So for your first run, enjoy it. Enjoy the crowd support, laugh, talk to people, look at the famous hills, look at the views from the Valley of 1,000 Hills. Have a look at that view. It's spectacular when you go through Drummond. Turn back when you're on poly shorts and look down at the railway bridge going across the gorge there. Those kinds of things I didn't do. And I remember when I got to my last lap in that first run, there were 2 or 3 runners around me. Suddenly a little group had formed and we all tried to outsprint each other. Well, we did, you know, for what? For 43rd, 44th and 45th position. It would have been much nicer to slow down, look at the crowd and absorb that whole thing of, wow, that you're here, you're running your last lap of the Comrades Marathon in the stadium, in those days, the Jan Smuts Stadium. This is incredible. You've just become a winged messenger. So I would spend a little bit more time absorbing it and enjoying it. But otherwise, I'm quite happy with my first run.
Lindsey, over to you.
Cool. Thank you. Bruce, I saw Belinda's list of questions that she had for you. And I think what she's probably going to do after this is invite you to run Comrades with her one day so she can have time to fit them all in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I have followed my own advice that I gave to Belinda, actually. She asked me, when she sent me the list, she said, what do you think other people want to hear? And I said, you know what, Belinda, you don't get the opportunity to chat to Bruce and be the one who chooses to ask the questions very often. So pick the questions or pick that you want the answers to, because I guarantee you it'll be interesting for everybody. And so that is exactly what I've done tonight. I've spent many years on the road with you, actually doing novice talks, in fact. So
yeah, we did a lot.
We know the obvious answers. So I'm gonna, and I also wanted to pitch the questions. Some are about Comrades, but also in a more general frame for people that may be joining us from around the world that are going to run and other ultra marathons. But the one that I really like that I've heard you talking about many times, and that is not running for a couple of days before a race. Now, there's a little bit of a theme to some of my questions, and that is that a lot of the things that you did this first time worked for you, and so you kept them. And so I'm always curious, did you keep them because they worked the first time, or over the years did you step out of them and then they didn't work for you? So how did that not running before evolve for you? Did you keep that all the way through your career?
The thing with an ultra, you know, particularly a brutal ultra like Comrades, is that you need to have strong, fresh, rested legs when you start. And so I would always err on the side of caution, and I'm exaggerating, and you've heard me saying this before, Lindsey, but I'd rather arrive at the start line of a Comrades or an ultra slightly undertrained and slightly overweight than the opposite. In other words, overtrained and a bit too skinny, because it's 90 Ks of hell, you know. And so my approach to the race always was to have an exaggerated long taper over about 2 to 3 weeks, where I would start slashing the mileage that I did each week. And then I might keep the quality going because you've got all that endurance, you've got all that strength from months before of training before. And then in the week before the race, I've never really changed this. I would do, let me get this right, about a 15, 10, 8, 5, nothing, nothing, nothing. So for 3 days before the race, I would do absolutely nothing, no running whatsoever. And there are some people who say, no, they can't do that. They've got to get out. Well, then, you know, get out and do a very light jog. But what always amazes me when I'm down at Comrades is the day before the race, I look out of my hotel window, or I'm down on the beachfront strolling around, and I'm commentating. Let's say I'm not even running. And huge groups of people, impies of people are running up and down the beachfront, and you're running 90 Ks the next morning. Whoa, you know, what are you trying to do? Feel good for yourself so that you'll be okay tomorrow morning. So I always like that feeling that I was slightly greasy, desperate to get out there and run, champing at the bit a little bit, and then obviously when the race gun goes, then you don't explode out of there, you ease out of there slowly. And it just worked, Lindsey. You touch on it, worked beautifully every time. It's a different thing if you may be going to be running a shorter distance race. Well, you can throw that easily into the middle of an intense training week, but you can't throw an ultra easily into the middle of an intense training week. So I take issue with some coaches who, for, you know, some of them, we know who they are. They make their runners run a 40K run with 10 days to go to the race, or why? You know, it's just, that's actually the question. Why do you do that? Oh, because it makes them tough. Yeah, but it also ruins their legs for race day.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I can sum that up kind of as a tip for novices, it's really just to say that in the last 10 days leading into particularly marathons and longer, you're not going to be able to get yourself much fitter than you are at that point in time.
Absolutely.
And what you are going to do is be able to make yourself tired and potentially injured. So, yeah.
Yes.
Cool. I really like that one. The other one that I picked out, that, I mean, again, you've always said it, and we've differed a little bit on this one, but driving the route of any ultra or difficult race, or any race that you don't know what you are in for. For me, it's not so much about how important it is to do it. I mean, you obviously believe that it is, and I don't like being stuck in a car the day before. But this is my question: is why do you feel it's important, and when do you feel that it is?
So let me answer the second part first before I forget it. Never the day before. The day before, it will make you so tense. And as you say, driving over the Comrades route, it's exhausting doing it. You know, and you get into a bad mood and you fight with your significant other because you get lost, particularly a race like Comrades. I like to say, you know, 2 or 3 days before, if you're down there, go over the route. And I've run the Comrades 30 times. I've trained on the route, and I still, if I was running Comrades in a week's time, I would still drive over the route to have another look at it. So I recommend it because it gives you a very good idea of what's coming. And in particular, because what it does is it terrifies you, because you see how brutal those hills are. And as we know, both in the up and down run, there are 5 registered hills, but, you know, Cowie's, I'm going to forget one, Fields Hill, Botha's Hill, Inchanga, Polly Shorts, if you're going up on the way down, replace Polly's with Cowie's Hill. But it's the same, they're very, very tough. So you look at those, but it's not just those, it's all the unnamed hills. I mean, there's one that to me has always been a friend, because from time to time, I've passed people on that one, on the up run, which is the 3rd hill outside Camperdown. It's 750 meters long. It has no name. It's got one tree next to it. It's grass. It's got one tree next to it. And there's always about 20 runners huddled underneath the tree trying to grab the bits of shade that are there. No name. In any other race in the world, it would be called Heart Attack Mountain or Coronary coronary thrombosis heights, no name. And one of the things that I've enjoyed now is when there is a Comrades, I take a bus tour, a route tour, and I generally actually, it gets full of foreign runners who come, New Zealanders, Australians, Germans, and they all come along. And when we set off, we do the whole route and we go all the way to the finish. And when we get to the finish, we go into the stadium and we walk around the field so they can see their last lap. The only thing we don't do, it's sort of superstitious. Nobody touches the finish line. Nobody touches the finish line. So no, that's for 2 days' time. No. But we drive the whole route. And when we set off, I just love it. It's like I'm like the teacher, and here's my kindergarten, and everybody's so excited, and they're talking and laughing and cracking jokes. And as the journey unfolds, and as it gets longer and longer, and people start saying, "What's this hill? What's the name of this one?" So no, that doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't have a name. It just goes quieter and quieter and quieter, and you can see these runners, novice runners from all over the world, suddenly going, no, I don't think I'm going to get a Bill Rowan. I'm just going to adjust that to a 10-hour. You can see them adjusting their schedule. And there's nobody who's jumping up and down at the end. They're very quiet and humble. And that is exactly the right frame of mind to be in when you start an ultra like the Comrades. Comrades does not reward the brave. Comrades rewards the meek. And you start slowly and you stay slow and you pick it up at the end if you're very lucky. And in fact, in my book, in Wing Messenger, I say I learned very early on. My first race was the Spring Striders 32, and I started too fast. I started with all my training mates who I trained with at university, and a couple of them were way too good for me. Jack Snayman, actually one of my great friends from the sweatshop here, and they gave me a hiding, and I died in the second half of that race. So the last 16Ks was 32K race. Second 16Ks were very tough. And so after that, it changed my training tactics forever. You could say I was scarred. And so my approach always with an ultra particularly is start like a coward and finish like a hero. That's how you run them.
One thing that you were not immune to, despite your genetics, was the novice injuries, calves, shins.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping Belinda's going to give us a little bit of novice injury advice before we go into a full Q&A. But what I was particularly interested in knowing is that, when you were a novice and experiencing this, because you did run through a few of them, as we all do, how did you ultimately make the decision, particularly as a novice, how did you make the decision to know, okay, I really do need to back off and rest now? And how did you make that decision later in your career when the stakes were higher for missing training sessions?
Yeah, so, everybody knows you get niggles, but there's a difference between a niggle and an injury. And so I always used to say, when something was there, my judgment of it was, if it's a little niggle and it goes away, forget about it. If it's there and it gets worse as you run, you aren't going to win. The injury is going to win. And so you have to do something about it. In my day, I can't even think of a physio that I went to, but we would just back off and rest. And so I took that decision later on. Later on in my running career, I knew my biomechanics very well, and I'm a heavy pronator, and I pronate excessively in both feet, but particularly the left. So I need a shoe that's stable, that looks after my feet. I can race in a racing shoe, but I mustn't train in it, otherwise I'll be injured. And when I was hit by an injury, I would deal with it immediately, because the injury will always win. You think you can overcome it. I'm tough, it'll go away. It just doesn't. And so, I think I was cautious. And then when I was getting depressed or bleak about an injury, I would always look on the positive side and say, think of this positively. You're probably getting a rest that you weren't going to give yourself, and your body is going to be so grateful for this rest.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing in elite athletes that I'm flabbergasted how often I hear it, and how few times people can connect the dots. I hear so many times, I can't believe how well I performed because I missed X amount of training. You hear it over and over and over, and you go, guys,
Lindsey,
let the penny drop. Let the penny drop.
My favorite, my absolute favorite is Carlos Lopez, is one of my heroes. He's actually in my book because I met him, took a photo with him. He won the 1984 Olympic marathon. He also won the World Cross Country Champs 3 times. And funny enough, one of them was Zolabad. But the Olympic marathon, he was hit by a car 10 days before the marathon. He was knocked over by a car, no broken bones, but badly bruised. He could not run for 10 days before the Olympic marathon. He could not run. He managed eventually to start shuffling a couple of days before. He told the Portuguese athletics authorities, look, I'm withdrawing. You're going to have to pull me out. And they said, please, Carlos, just run. Please, because you're famous and we need the Portuguese colors, at least in the lead pack for a while. So he said, okay, I'll run, but don't be cross with me when I drop out. And he won the gold medal.
Yeah.
And his last 5 kilometers, when he broke away from the last few people who were there, his last 5.2 Ks was exactly 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's what rest does for you.
I think I've got time to squeeze in one more there, Belinda. I've got a few more, but one more that I've always really liked whenever Bruce has given talks, and it is specific to Comrades, but it's just such great advice for when you're training for any race. And Belinda actually made a comment to me when we were chatting, and you were very consistent in the early stages of your running, but you certainly didn't increase it much, and you were puttering along at between 40 and 60 Ks a week, and then you got serious. And that was to become a hallmark of your training over the years, and it's something you really stress on all the time. And again, what kind of was your thinking? Because most people, December comes, they're not working, they go berserk, and when 1st of January, Oaks think that it's peak Comrades training time, and you always delayed that. So what was the thinking there? What led you to that decision? Because that's probably some of your best advice I've ever heard you give.
Yeah, so I think we now understand, and more or less, that about 8 to 10 weeks of intense training, the time that you can do your hardest and the most amount of training, is about what we can do. I'm not saying you come from no base. So as you heard, I putted along at 40, 50 Ks a week. And then at kind of if Comrades, let's say it's the end of May or a week or two into June, about the beginning of March, that's when you put your head down and you start getting deadly serious. And that's allowing yourself at the end, that taper that I spoke about. So probably about 12 weeks before race day, you start, and then you work, and then it's consistent hard work. And if you do that, there's 2 things. One is you build up tremendous strength and fitness, but you don't get, if I can use the South African expression, gatvol. If you start training hard in November, December, January, if you're not fortunate enough to get injured, you are so sick and tired of running. And if you live in South Africa, as the training gets more and more important, so we plunge further and further into winter. And so every run is dark, it's cold, it's tough. And you were training flat out in December. What were you training for? It's 8 to 10 weeks. And then people say, yeah, Bruce, but you're gifted and talented and you're genetically talented, so you can get away with being lazy like that. I'm not. I have to train hard because precisely. I said, no, precisely because you aren't gifted and talented, you can't make any mistakes. I can make mistakes. You can't make one. And making your first mistake is then you start training flat out in January. But you just can't. I don't know what it is. It might be that it's in South Africa, in a normal year, it's our racing calendar, which is packed with exciting races.
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
Still hear me, guys, because I got interrupted suddenly.
I think that was your Siri.
Is there something else I can help with?
This is fascinating. I've got Siri talking to me.
Yep.
I'm not sure I understand.
Anyway, I'm always astonished. And the key words are: success does not go to the person who trains the hardest. If it did, I would never have won one Comrades, because there are people who trained much harder than me. Success goes to the person who trains the cleverest. And by cleverest, it must be for you, whatever suits you best. It's to get the most out of yourself. And it's being cunning and wise and being sensible and conservative at times. And yes, sometimes you have to train very hard. I've always said, for an end of May, June comrades, April is the most important month. April is vital.
Yeah, and look, and I think the key is really that you trained pretty much year round. And this sort of idea behind a 10% rule is a great rule for a novice who's starting out and is you want to slowly add that layering. But if you're consistent for a very long period of time, you can afford to take those jumps into that hard training for those short periods of time and peaking for a race. So, yeah, I see I have gone a little bit over my allotted time there, Belinda. So if you want to jump in here again, and I see there are a few questions building up too from the people listening.
Thank you.
By the way,
with all my questions. Sorry, Bruce.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, by the way, Belinda, I owe Lindsey's dad, Trevor, a lot. Trevor was Comrades gold medalist before my time, and I learned quite a bit from him. He was a Vitsi as well, and he gave those old-time Vitsis gave us quite a lot of advice.
Okay, yeah, so I recall you referred to him in your book.
Yeah, no, that's and I also learned a lot from the old man, and because of my dad, I've spent lots of time with people like Bruce. So very fortunate.
You're lucky. Okay, so obviously being a physiotherapist and then having read your book, having been a novice comrades runner as well, is so much good advice in your book for novices that I just like to go through. And I find important for them to stay not injury-free, but to minimize injuries as much as possible. The first thing you mentioned in your book, Bruce, was about your biomechanical, let's say, your imbalances.
Yes.
And how important it is for a runner to know your biomechanics. And I'd actually like you to tell us the story of how your biomechanics was tested by Tim Noakes.
Yeah, so I didn't know. I mean, when you go back into the 70s, we hadn't heard of iliotibial band friction syndrome and chondromalacia patella and all those words. We just said, I've got a sore knee or something, whatever it might be. And so I had this at a certain point, and obviously it was when I had started to really up the training a bit, I suddenly had really painful, throbbing pain on both sides of both. Is it the tibia in front, the bone in front, what we would now call shin splints, I think. And I just couldn't work it out why it was so sore. And the more I ran, it just wouldn't go away. And then I would rest a bit and it still wouldn't go away. And eventually I contacted our good friend, Professor Tim Noakes, who is one of the world's geniuses of, sports medicine. And Tim happened to be flying to a conference or something. And he came up from Cape Town. He said, I've got half an hour between flights. I can meet you in the departure lounge of Joburg Airport, if you can see me there. And I got to him and he made me run up and down. He said, oh, it's so easy, Bruce. You're a heavy pronator. And by pronating, I mean, when my feet strike the ground, they turn in like this. And they put excessive strain on the muscles of the lower part of the leg, the calf muscles, but particularly the muscle called the soleus muscle. And so what I had was microscopic tears of the soleus muscle. And every time I ran in unsupportive shoes, I was just continuing to tear those little things, not tears like a sprinter, but little sore tears. And so Tim diagnosed me like that, and then told me that I had the treatment that I had to have, which in those days was cross frictions, which was agonizing, but it worked. And I very, very rarely after that ever got that injury again, or any injury similar, because I knew what my problem was. So I could go to get a running shoe and I could dismiss that whole rack over there, because none of those shoes are going to suit me. They are all unsupportive, fast racing. I need this supportive one that's going to hold. And you don't want to stop pronating completely because that's part of the shock absorption. And that's important, but excessive pronation. And once I'd worked that out, that injury's gone.
Awesome advice. On the topic of shoes as well, you say in your book that just because the Comrades champion wears a certain brand and model of shoe does not mean that the shoe will work for every runner. Now, nowadays, in your days, there wasn't so much option in terms of shoes. Nowadays, and especially with the Nike and the Vaporflies and the next percent, people think that that's the next best shoe. And you actually say here that it's worth visiting a specialist running store, in our business as well, podiatrists.
Yes.
So, that would be, besides the biomechanical assessment, shoes, getting the novice runner in the proper shoe is obviously just as important.
Yeah. Once you've got something that suits you, I know exactly where to look and what shoes. I'm a really fascinating phase in my running career now because I'm now buying my own shoes again after about 30 years of not buying them. But it's interesting. But the only thing that shocked me is the price. But yeah, so I know exactly what will suit me and what won't. And yeah, as I said there, just because the leading runner wears such and such doesn't mean it's going to suit you. And remember, often with those leading runners, the shoe is actually custom built for them. Not only is it that model and that brand, but they have actually customized it for that runner, because it's not, you can't even get that shoe off the shelf because it's actually made for his feet.
Yes, very valid point.
Or her feet.
Comments I'd like to make in terms of, reading your book, going through your training, and again, having been a novice myself, my advice to novice runners would probably not be to consider your book a training program.
No.
Because running a 6:45 for your very first Comrades, again, you've said you've chosen your parents really, really well. And your genetics is very much in line. And one thing I want to ask you, because it's a thing that's very close to kind of my perspective on training, and that's base training. Did you ever go through a period where you did base training, where you just spent 12 weeks, like Phil Maffetone's method, of running at low heart rate to get your body used to the progressive load of running?
Well, I kept that, I always said consistency is the key. So as I said earlier, I think the longest I've ever taken off running is maybe a week after a Comrades Marathon, or possibly some trip somewhere where I just couldn't run. And so I was always very conscious of keeping that going. My base training might have been a bit quicker than your average runner, but it would have been base training for me. And that's always to have that foundation. So when I talk about 8 to 10 weeks of training hard for the Comrades Marathon or a marathon, I don't mean you just go from nothing to training hard. You've got a base. So because if you don't have that base, that foundation, then you will get injured, because you get struck by that disease. It's called desperately keen titus. And desperately keen titus is the downfall of most runners because they train too hard, too fast, too often, too long, all the twos. So yeah, I like that. And funny enough, in those first couple of years when I ran at WITS, the approach in those days was actually that 90% of the runners ran as hard as they could from January until the end of May. They ran Comrades, and then they focused on their exams and on their academic life, and they stopped running. And then they would only start again the following January. And so the thing that I got right from the word go is, partly because I was addicted to running, I said, no, I'm not going to stop. Once I've got over the Comrades soreness and I feel I've recovered from Comrades, I'm going to keep going through winter. I'm going to keep going. And that paid huge dividends later on.
Now that you mentioned recovery, it's also one of my questions. How did you recover? What did you do? Because obviously for novice runners, and actually for all runners, recovery is as important as your training. Rest and recovery. Besides rest, was there anything else you found that worked for you for recovery?
I used to get a very strong urge for protein. And I think that might have been the muscle damage. So I can tell you, down in Durban, wouldn't do it before the race, but after the race, there's nothing better than a lamb curry. So obviously rest, and then, yeah, rest and a little bit of stretching and stuff like that I would throw in to try and ease out muscles and things like that. But immediately after the race, I don't know, I've even had some Comrades marathons where right near the end, I start fantasizing having a steak. I know some guys and girls fantasize about having a cold beer, but I'd actually fantasize about having some protein. And I think it's because the muscle damage, your body's sending you signals that, hey, there's repair work here.
Now, another very good point that you brought up in your book, and it's a point I think a lot of novice runners, and again, a lot of experienced runners forget. And that is that, you know, what you do during the course of your day and the impact of that. You said you took into, you know, your complete physical exertion of a day into consideration in terms of your training.
Absolutely, because you can't divorce the training from everything else you're doing, the stresses and strains. And it might not even be physical, it might be emotional, it might be stress at work, stress in your relationship or whatever. You have to take all those factors into account. And it just so happened that I was studying archaeology at WITS, and we, particularly in later years, would go on some extensive field trips. I particularly became specialized in Bushman San rock art, going up into the Drakensberg, high up into the berg looking for sites, and then down into the valleys and out of the, you know, with a pack on your back and all the gear and your food and your water. I would suddenly realize I've been walking for 5 hours today. I actually don't need a run, you know. But some people, they're in danger of running for their diary, you know, or for their training schedule. My training schedule says I must do 10 Ks today, but actually my car broke down and I had to push it for 2 Ks to the garage. You know, you got to take, I would take all that stuff into account. And whatever, my girlfriend broke up with me. I'm so traumatized. I've had a bereavement in the family. I've just been fired from my job. I'm so stressed that you're going to go on that run. It's going to be horrible. So you have to take all those factors into account.
Again, very good advice. In your book, again, you refer to training when sick. At a point, I think you bumped your head, and you also said that obviously injuries, and that is not the only thing that stops a person from training. So, you know, do you still feel, you know, I mean, they have this philosophy of everything above the head. If your symptoms are above the head, you can train. If your symptoms are below, your throat, below your throat, then no training like flu.
You know, now I've learned it's the same story actually. Once you start getting sick and you try and fight it, you get worse. And in those early days, I was hit by a lot of upper respiratory tract infections from doing, I think, fast running, like cross-country races and things like that, time trials in winter. And yeah, that would repeat on me often. And you can see in the book that I was naughty because I tried to beat it at times. I just thought, it'll go away. Take some antibiotics and keep running. In the end, this is an extreme measure, but in the end, and it made a quantum leap in my running. In 1980, end of 1979, I actually had my tonsils removed because I had a tonsillectomy and it worked. It was incredible. I'd cut down on those things straight away. And funny enough, the following year was the year I first won Comrades. So something was correct there. I was getting upper respiratory tract infections, sore throats all the time.
Now, the dreaded, always ever elusive question of nutrition. Now, obviously in your days, what worked for you was a Sultan diet, and I'm not going to because of that. And now it's kind of the Banting diet. So in terms of nutrition, I think one thing I'd like to say to everybody is that there's so much information out there, and much like shoes and everything else, they need to find what works for them. Now, my question to you is do you think over time we've overcomplicated our nutrition, you know, with gels and powders, and you must take this at this point? And I mean, I remember running Comrades in 2009, first half on Fordyce little chew tab, second half on Powerade, and I was fine. So it's overcomplicated.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure it's very overcomplicated. I would, if I had to go back now, and I would just stick to the simpler things. I've got a bit of a gammy knee now, but my last half decent race that I ran, I think I was 56, and I ran New York, and I ran at 2:58. You know, the night before I had I'm banting nowadays, but the night before I just thought, you know what, I had a little bit of fish and pasta the night before, simple, 2 glasses of red wine, you know, off to bed. And then during the race, I ran on water, coffee before, but on water the whole way. And then at about 18 miles, there was a little kid handing out gels. And I remember that was actually quite cute. I ran past and I said, can I grab one? Because my body was just telling me that maybe, you know, for a race, I wouldn't normally, but for a race, maybe I needed some high octane fuel. I just felt, and it was actually quite sweet because I said, can I grab one? And I went to grab one. He said, sure you can. But why would you have the raspberry flavored one when you can have the chocolate one? So I had one of those, yeah. I think that we do complicate things. And I love the East African runners quite a lot because they just basically stick with what they eat and they run beautifully. You know, they don't really change their meals. I mean, I remember William Tolo winning New York Marathon a few years ago, also around that year that he won. And he set off the fire hydrant in his room because he started making his own putupup. He was making millipup in his room and he didn't realize he had a little primer stove because they couldn't make it in the hotel. So he started making his own, and the next thing, the fire alarm went off and the corridor started being sprayed with water.
Okay. Before Lindsey, I know that you're going to take over now with the questions because apparently my sound's not coming through too well. The last thing I just want to mention in terms of running injuries, very important comment by Bruce that said, listen to your body. And it's something that takes many runners many years to learn. Yeah,
listening to your body, it's an art, and you'll get to know yourself well, and you know what works for you. And don't change it because somebody else is suggesting something that doesn't work for you. So I always listen to what my body's telling me.
Cool. Yeah, so we'll move over to the Q&A bit from the audience. A few comments that I'll also just read because I think Bruce really does great work for running, not only in South Africa, but so Susan Renske just saying this is so profound. Your life does indeed change when running when running the Comrades. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then we've got Gareth Hallgreen. Would love to hear from Bruce how Comrades compares to all the other ultra distance marathons he ran.
Well, actually, look, Comrades is in a league of its own. The difference is that if you take the pantheon of the great city marathons, like, you know, and I've run all of them except Chicago. So London, New York, Boston, Berlin, Paris, they're all absolutely fabulous. Right up there that belongs there in amongst them is Comrades Marathon. And it's unique because it's the only one that's an ultra. Maybe the second tier, I would put the Two Oceans as our other great race. The races overseas ultras are for smaller groups. So, I mean, I ran the London to Brighton, which your dad also ran, Lindsey, and he will agree with me. London to Brighton, the start, there's 250, 300 runners, and they're all good runners. There's nobody there who's going to just shuffle their way through. It's, you know, it's done and dusted at 9 hours, and that's about the same time as it's the same distance as Comrades. I think one of the great races of ultras in the world, the Western States 100 miler, but it's a trail race with also a couple of hundred entries, and you know, it's 100 miles of trail. I'm trying to think of something, you know, without a doubt, the Comrades stands alone in that it's almost like a major city marathon because, you know, normally at 25,000 runners, the history, the traditions that go with it. I mean, it's a truly unique race, and I think it sums us up as South Africans. It's just tough, but with the history and the traditions, I love it. And there's nothing really to compare. If I think London to Brighton, well, what's a tradition there? Big Ben starts the race, and you have a carbo loading party 2 nights before where you toast the Queen. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to belittle any race anywhere because they're all magnificent, but Comrades stands head and shoulders above. You know, if you said to me, Bruce, you can win one more ultra in your life and you can choose whichever one you want to, I say Comrades again, please.
Yeah, look, it really is a truly great ultra. And then from Magwaza, good evening. Is it better to run a down run or up for your first Comrades? The $1 million question. I'm glad Bruce is in the hot seat.
I ran the up run for my first run, and no problem. You know, which is the better one to run? It's usually the feeling is the better one is the one you're not running. So while you're going down, you wish you were going up, and while you're going up, you wish you were going down. They're both very, very tough. If you want to find the difference, the down run is more painful. The up run is more tiring and exhausting because you climb, the down run you pound. The down run is probably a little bit quicker, and the slower you are, the quicker it is, if you know what I mean. So if you're an elite runner, you might be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes quicker going down. If you're one of the slower runners, you might be 10 minutes or more quicker going down. So if you're panicking about getting in before the finish, maybe a down run. But wow, you know, just whichever. So when you're going to run your first run, just whatever the year is, just take it and do it.
Yeah, I mean, and it is different for everyone. I managed just from a collection of errors. I did my first 4 Comrades down, and I didn't get one of them right. And then I did it up, got it spot on, and that gave me the confidence to sort out the down, and that's how it goes. So yeah, I think just embrace it. And
if I look at 2 multiple winners, myself and Alan Robb, I love the up run. Alan loves the down run. That's it.
Yeah. From Sarah van Ulst, hopefully I pronounced that correct. Hi there, Sarah here. What was your most memorable running moment?
Oh, wow. No, that's impossible. There are just hundreds and hundreds. I can't even, you know, running your first Comrades and finishing is incredibly memorable. Winning for the first time is incredibly memorable. That's just, you know, I would say just maybe that very first run that I went on, 10 minutes around the Wits rugby fields. I can still remember it. It was absolutely freezing cold. I couldn't hold the pen properly afterwards to write in my training diary. And something, and I'm not a great believer in these kind of things, but something when I ran that first one said to me, this is one of the most significant moments of your life. The fact that you've just run with a commitment to run the Comrades in a year's time and you're writing it down. But, you know, then there's also adventures that I've had, things that I've shared with people. I've run an ultra 500 miles inside the Arctic Circle between 2 Inuit Eskimo villages, run all around the world, starting the Boston Marathon, you know, probably the world's most famous marathon. When the Boston starts, that is something incredible. Wow. It's, I tell you what was quite memorable, running the London Marathon with Gordon Ramsay, Hell's Kitchen. I ran with Gordon Ramsay. People know lots of things about him and his bad language, and let me tell you, his language is particularly interesting towards the end of a marathon. But something that people know very little about him was actually Gordon Ramsay's run 3 Comrades marathons. Hell's Kitchens, all that swearing, and he's done 3 Comrades. And we on the start line of London Marathon, he said, Bruce, tell these people, this is not a race. This is a jog. Tell them about Comrades. Yeah, so it's impossible to say how many. I'll tell you one thing I did do. So I can say this. In one Comrades, the 88 Comrades, I had a decent lead with about 2 kilometers to go, 3 to go. My seconds told me it's more than 10 minutes. So you more than 10 minutes in the lead, and I was running fast. You can never say you're going to win because something could go wrong. You could cramp. But what I did that was very important for me now is I froze that moment. I took that moment and I've remembered it, and I put it in the back of my brain. I said, remember this. Your legs are very sore. You're definitely getting a black toenail, but you're running fast. There's salt on the side of your cheek and your mouth a bit tacky because you've had too many of those gels and they're starting to, and whatever. But you're in the front of the Comrades Marathon, and there's the crowd is going mad. There's the lead vehicle. There's the press taking photographs. You're coming down Washington Road and you're going to turn into Oroby, and you're probably going to win the Comrades Marathon. So keep this forevermore. And I get goosebumps now when I think about it, because I'm looking down the road for the little boy who holds, the winner carries a baton across the line. And when you get that baton, it's like Excalibur. It's like a lightsaber. It's just like, it's the most amazing. There isn't a single winner of the race except maybe Alan, because he's so shy, who hasn't raised that thing high in the air when you get it. And I thought, just keep that moment and freeze it forever. And so whenever I am feeling a bit bleak, like in the worst moments of lockdown, or I'm disappointed with myself that I've done something that I'm embarrassed about or ashamed of, or I've let myself down in some way, I can unfreeze that. I can literally melt that moment and say, once you led the Comrades Marathon, you know, and so I can be happy with myself again for a bit. So that's probably the most memorable. I froze a minute from the 1988 Comrades.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Then from Pubelan Pile, the mind over matter, or scientifically called the central governor theory, in two athletes of equal potential, taking the above into account, do you agree that the athlete with a stronger mindset will finish first, especially in the context of an ultramarathon? What are your thoughts?
Wow, that's difficult. I mean, Lindsey, help me. You'll know that the Hawaii Ironman, when Dave Scott and Mark Allen, I think people say that's the greatest race ever, when two equals went head to head. And yeah, I think Mark Allen won in the end, but only just, or whatever. They were together coming out of the water. They were together on the bike, isn't that right? They were together the whole way through the marathon. And in the end, Mark Allen won. Sometimes it's the person, not who wants to win the most, but the person who wants to lose the least. And so I'll give you a classic example from my era, track and field athletics that I remember is 1980 Olympic Games, Sebastian Coe versus Steve Ovett. They were the two finest milers, 800-meter runners in the world, and they happened to both come from Britain. And they traded the world records at mile and 1,500 meters, 800 meters. And then they went to the Olympic Games, and they were equal. But each of them had an event that they were better at. So Sebastian Coe was the world record holder for 800 meters, and he was a second faster than Ovett. And Ovett had not lost a single 1,500-meter race for more than 2 years. There's my little granddaughter. I'm just waving at her. I'm called Impa. She can't say grandpa. I'm Impa. So she just said, hello, Impa. And the two of them contrived to win the race that they shouldn't have won and to lose the race that they should win. So in the 800 meters, Sebastian Coe, much better than anybody else, Steve Ovett wins it. And then a week later, they are together in the 1,500 meters. Steve Ovett has 53 1,500-meter races in a row that he's won, and Coe won it. And I think it was because the difference was they were equal. Coe was the one who wanted to lose the least because he didn't have a gold medal yet. Ovett had a gold from the 800. And when it came to that last kick, Coe was going to die rather than fail again. I think that's the difference. It's the psychological stuff that's going on. So in the end, they both came out battered and bruised. They both won and they both lost. Yeah. And I think that's the only way I can work it out. You know, if I had a twin, how would I beat my twin? I don't know.
Look, and there are examples where that need to win or push yourself ends in disaster. I I think in the context of this conversation, that may well be the downfall of both Jose, Charlie, and Bob Delamato tried desperately. Mark Page, they tried desperately to beat you, and they knew they couldn't play your game, so pushed that much harder early. So I think there are loads of examples where wanting something or saying that you want something more than somebody else isn't. It's not always going to be the Paula Newby Fraser falling over and not making it to the finish of Ironman. So yeah, I think that's a very complicated one. And then from a good friend of yours, Bruce, from Norrie Williamson, he would like to know your thoughts on how important it is for people to have the fastest possible 5 or 10 kilometer time that a runner can have, no matter what their level of ability.
Look, there's no doubt that once you improve your 5-10K time, you improve everything else comes with it. And a major jump for me was having run, as you'll read in my book, there's no track sessions or stuff like that there. And once I started looking at speed and running a bit faster, and then in fact even looking at, I used to run like B League 5,000 meter race on a Friday evening at RAU, UJ, University of Johannesburg now, or a occasional 10,000 meter. I even ran some 1,500 meters at 3,000. The increased speed there went right through into my other distances as well, because you raise your cruising speed. So if you can run 5 kilometers, at 4 minutes a K, you're going to be able to cruise in a marathon at 4.5 minutes a K. You're not even breathing. And so then your times will come down. So that is the key. Yeah. Look at improving your shorter stuff.
Yeah. And I would say that back in your day and right up until the mid 90s, one of the things that all of our top athletes did was race cross country. Although you didn't personally love it, you raced a lot of it. And that is something that no longer, with our top athletes anyway, a lot of them do not go for cross country.
You're right, Lindsey. When I decided that I had a chance of maybe getting a gold medal or winning, I looked at Alan Robb. I looked at him. What's Alan doing that he's won 4 times? What is he doing? And I noticed that he was every Saturday was running for Germiston Kellys in a boring, dusty, over the mine dumps through the burnt felt cross-country race of 12 Ks. And he was making the top 20. He wasn't even winning it, but he'd make the top 20. And I'm thinking, but he's the only Comrades runner here, and he's winning Comrades. That's interesting.
Yeah. There is another question from Pubalan. If we have time, I'll come to that one. Just want to spread the questions around. So from Bruce Barker, any thoughts on adopting a ketogenic diet as a way to manage race day carbohydrate intake? I know you're not a nutritionist, but obviously you are a bit of a banter. So your thoughts on
well,
I know
I
you gave
would
a little bit of that answer already.
Yeah, look, I'd certainly like to look at it. We need to do the research. I think there's a lot of research. There's a couple of PhDs waiting for people to do it. It's too late for me because I don't think I'm going to be running any more ultras. So, or thinking about my diet before, you might persuade me to run another marathon if it happened to be a bunch of good friends decide, come on, let's go and run Paris or something so we can see the city. But I wouldn't get too worried about my diet for something. I'm more worried about the quality of my phone. Can I get good photos while I'm running around? But I think, we need to do a lot of research into it. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an archaeologist by training. Sadly, I don't practice anymore, but I'm still slightly involved. But if I look at our origins as a species, we are hunter-gatherers. We are hunter-gatherers. And when we were hunter-gatherers, we were incredibly good runners. And we could run animals to the point of exhaustion and then kill them and eat them. So you have to kind of think about how our digestive systems evolved and what are we most used to. Say hello to everybody. Sorry, here's Amy. Sorry, Amy, I'm just talking to people. Oh, wait, supper's ready. Okay. Impa, yeah. Are you a rabbit? Yes, you silly Billy, she said. I'm a rabbit. Anyway, yeah, so you've got to think about what were we? You know, we were hunter-gatherers. And hunter-gatherers means, you know, gathering would include things like eggs from a nest, a tortoise, yes, some berries from a tree, you know, but I'm not sure how many pure carbohydrates there were knocking around in those days.
Then, yeah, I think we've got time for another three, and then we'll hand over to Belinda to wrap up. But here's someone who knows their comrades. They've run one, but they are still a down run novice. So the question is, if you could give one tip for a first down run novice. I did my first run in 2019. I'm looking forward to 2022.
So down run novice is, don't be shocked. It was certainly, first of all, do what we said very early on while we were chatting, drive the route. Don't be shocked by for how long you will question yourself, are you sure we are running a down run? Because for most of the first 55 kilometers of the down run, because it's a down run, you go up. That's what it seems like. You run down poly shorts and then you go up. And you run down little polys and then you go up. And you go up to Nchanga and up. Everything is up with some steep downhills and then up again. And you only start the down run at Kersney College. That's after about 55 kilometers or so. So for 55 kilometers, you have been running a race that's got a lot of uphills. And then at 55 kilometers, the geologist will tell you what the fault is, but it's a fault that broke away. And outside Kersney College, the first hill, Bothers Hill. And before I get corrected by people about my pronunciation, it's KZN, it is Bothers. They have never heard of Bothers Hill. And then you plummet down Bothers Hill, and then you plummet all the way with a couple of ups, all the way down to the coastline. So your legs that are nicely tenderized and sore suddenly take a hammering. So it's just to be prepared for the fact that the down run is 55 kilometers of, it would be a brutal marathon, a brutal ultra on its own, if it was just the first 50 Ks. And then it's a steep drop down to the sea. And I remember at the top of Fields Hill, if it's a clear day, you can see the Indian Ocean, but you've got 22 Ks to go. So, and you're going down.
We need some inspiration here. So since we've got two questions left, I'm picking two of them. We unfortunately won't get to all of them, but from Francois Rothner, Lindsey just mentioned he didn't get his first 4 comrades right. I did not finish my first comrades, and I think mentally blocked me from running. So not just running comrades, it sounds like running. How do you get your head right for running?
And I think what you do is you set yourself goals that you can achieve, that you're pretty sure you can achieve. And I've got a scrapbook that I put all my first cuttings and badges and things in. And I noticed that I cut out and put little pieces of paper in with what my goal was. So my goal for my first Comrades Marathon was to earn a silver medal, which is 7.5 hours. So 7.5 hours was my goal. I was never going to be disappointed. And by the time I got to Comrades, my training friends and the people I ran with told me, no, Bruce, you're much better than 7.5. But that was still my backup goal. If all failed, I was going to get a 7.5, sub 7.5. So in the end, I ran 6:45, and my friends had told me, you're going to break 7. If you make your goal too difficult and too hard, you're going to put too much pressure on yourself. And so even when I had started winning Comrades, I never ever said break the record. I never said that to myself, break the record. I said, just win again, defend the title, even if it's a slow time. And in fact, the last Comrades that I won in 1990 was my slowest by miles, but I still won. So I wasn't disappointed with that event. So give yourself goals that you can achieve. Otherwise you're going to be disappointed. And then as you get more excited, you can start to set new goals.
Yeah, and I think in this instance, I would go back on the successes. Obviously, Comrades was a disappointment and didn't finish. So try and, like you bottled your moment of Comrades, there were marathons that were run and finished to qualify for Comrades. There were ultras that were run and finished. So I think dwell on those, and then Comrades is the ultimate prize, but don't set Comrades as your goal now. Set other goals. Read books like the Winged Messenger, and just try and draw some inspiration. I think being here tonight for you is a big step and will help you to get back and running. Last question, Bruce, and then it's we're starting to push it to the 7:30. And as you've heard, Bruce has been summoned by his granddaughter to dinner. He's late. And then I'll hand over to Belinda to just say thanks and sum up. But this is a great question.
Yep.
Who has been? It's from Dave Yule. I hope I've pronounced that right. Who has been your greatest Comrades competitor over your 9 wins, and why?
Okay, so to name, you've named already some of the names. I would probably have to say Alan Robb. He won 4. He was my hero in my first Comrades in my book. He won that year and beat me by an hour. But the hardest race that I ever ran, the hardest Comrades that I ever ran was 1982 down run, and Alan and I raced each other. So to put it into perspective, in 1980, Alan beat me and I was second, and I can tell you second is the worst position to finish. I also finished third in the Comrades Marathon. I was over the moon to finish third. To be on the podium and to get a gold medal, I was absolutely ecstatic. Second, I asked Gerda Steyn because she finished second before she won. She said to me, her words, she said, Bruce, second sucks. So Alan beat me in 1980, he beat me, I was second. I was catching him at the end, but he held me off because he was very experienced. It was a down run. The following year, 1981, I won, but Alan was ill and he never gave him, he finished, but he didn't have a great run. But in 1982, we met up again on a down run, and he was a better down runner than me. And we went head to toe from the top of Botha's Hill. He took off, and there was a group of 7 of us, and we had exactly 30 seconds to make up your mind whether you're going with him or staying. And I realized, no, this is no longer about being sensible. This is psychological. If I let Alan go, he's gone. So I went with him, and we went for the next 20 Ks, hammering each other. Every uphill I pushed, every downhill he pushed. And eventually I got away from him and I won that race. And that was the hardest race. I turned around 3 times on the track at the finish, on the field at the finish. I turned around 3 times to look over my shoulder because I was going so slowly. I couldn't believe that no one was catching me. So, and then Alan, he's won 4 times, 1 up, 3 downs. He was the first runner to break 5.5 hours for the Comrades, and he has the most gold medals of the men. He has 12 gold medals for finishing in the top 10. So yeah, but don't tell him I said that, because otherwise he'll think I'm getting soft. Tell him I chose somebody else. We're direct opposites in character. If you sat with Alan all day long chatting to him and you didn't know him, you would never know that he'd won the Comrades. He won't tell you. You'd have to drag it out of him. If you sit with me for 3 minutes, I'll tell you. He's Liverpool, I'm Manchester United. He's down run, I'm up run. But we're great buddies. But that was he's the hardest.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, can I say one thing? And that's, Bruce, thanks so much.
Thank you.
As a runner myself, having read your book makes me really hungry to run again. And I have one question I'd actually like to ask before we close. And there are so many runners out there that are kind of at a loss during COVID. What would be your advice to every runner out there currently going through this pandemic?
Yeah, no, all things must pass. It's one of my favorite groups, the Beatles, George Harrison's album, All Things Must Pass. it will come to an end. We will run together. We will have fun together. I never like to get too optimistic with things like this because you always hear about all these waves, but I just get a sense that there's the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm seeing events. I'm seeing trail races coming back. I'm seeing triathlons. I'm seeing bike races. I think we might go backwards over Easter, but I think after that, I don't know, hopefully. And we will look back on it. And so you've just got to say to yourself, whatever it is, I'm going to run a marathon as soon as we're back. I'm going to run 2022 Comrades. And just remember that we all feel the same, you know, and we can't wait to be with each other. I've been doing little book launches at the clubs, and clubs have been inviting me to come round. And I've realized it's not because I've just written I haven't written a Harper Lee, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird. This is not you know, J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. This is not one of those. This is a really cute little book that I'm quite pleased with. I'm the excuse for people to get together. They invite me around, bring your book, Bruce. And by the way, guys, we'll have a Brian, we'll talk, and nobody wants to go home. They all sit there and they just talk running. But we will be back, and we're gonna, I can't wait just to hug another runner and greet another runner. And there was one club, Alberton, that put a race on in November last year with a limit of 500 people. I was disqualified because I didn't realize if you're over 60, you're not allowed to run because you might die. But I ran anyway. And I was just running, and I looked up and I saw the 3K board. I saw the 3 kilometer board. And to see a distance board, I nearly burst into tears because I suddenly realized I'm in a race. And obviously nobody else has taken up the baton at this stage because it didn't really work for them. You know, you need more than 500 runners to make money, but we're nearly there. And I just think of it. It's like, I don't know, when you were a child and you were waiting for your birthday, it's coming. And
Thanks
keep going.
again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Belinda and Lindsey, thanks so much for holding the fort and for the wonderful questions which you posed. Thanks very much to those of you that submitted questions. I think they were fantastic and really gave us a sense of what it's like to be a novice, what it's like to be a champion. And Bruce, this might not be up for the Booker Prize, not this year anyway, until a few more stores around the world get it. But what a great read. Really, you've struck such a great balance between advice and anecdote. And please, guys, go out. It's in the stores from this week, so we've timed this webinar really well. It's available online. But if you're a runner, if you're a want-to-be runner, it's really a good book to go and buy for yourself, for your family. As Bruce says, he's around at the various running clubs, not only in Gauteng, but around the country. So look out for those. Have a chat, get him to sign your edition. Really is a good book. And Bruce, thanks for your support of running. Thanks for your support of Wits University over all these decades. We really do appreciate it. And of course, thanks to our sponsors, Asina Lita, for putting on these webinars. Really a great opportunity for us to present people associated with Wits sport and sports medicine. And thank you all for your support. We do appreciate it as well. So we wish you all a very good evening. Look out for our upcoming webinars. And here's the next one, a slightly different topic, but we'll be talking about concussion and diagnosis of concussion next week with some international experts. So we look forward to you joining us there and having more webinars where we can share our insights into sport and sports medicine. So a very good evening to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.